If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description. What do you get when you mix sci-fi with a Western? Star Wars, I mean Foreign Son. The mixing of those two genres has led to some memorable worlds and tales. Firefly has its fans, The Mandalorian was pretty sweet, at least in season 1, and some of my favorite anime of all time come from this amalgamation. Outlaw Star, Cowboy Bebop, my favorite, Trigun. So when I heard a Metroidvania was throwing its cowboy hat into the mix, you're darn tootin', I was coming along for the ride. So, what's Foreign Son about? You play as a lone pilgrim climbing a sinking metropolis inhabited by the Left Behind, descendants of those who survived the night the stars vanished and the eternal lighthouse rose. A colossal tower crowned with a literal sun. Armed with your beam saber, you'll cut through shifting factions, an unhinged cult, and strange otherworldly or interworldly forces as you push toward the lighthouse and its ominous Meridian Gate. Well, tan my hide and call me a Padawan, I'm in. But will this pilgrimage lead to enlightenment, or is this a journey destined to ride off into the sunset of mediocrity?
Combat.
Combat is all about clashing. The pilgrim has a beam saber, and so do a lot of his enemies, and there's nothing cooler than smacking beam sabers together and watching the sparks fly. And that's essentially what you do in Foreign Son. Clash sabers together until one of you gets tired. And when your opponent gets gassed, you go up to him and rip his heart out. Now, that's metal. There are a couple of mechanics you gotta keep in mind for these clashes. Poise and overheating. I think everyone knows what poise is at this point. Break it, and you get the Kali Ma jabroni straight to hell. Overheating is essentially your poise, though you can still move after you overheat. You just can't clash anymore. To reduce your overheat meter, you have to attack without clashing or block. So, fights are much more strategic than just smacking your Schwartzes together. The Pilgrim also has secondary heavy weapons he can use that don't clash, but they do much more damage and can stun enemies if they're doing some sort of stationary blocking move. You can also be stunned, but you have to be hit by an enemy's red attack. When enemies glow red, you cannot clash them. You have to move out of the way, typically with a dodge. Dodging costs stamina, and so does attacking with your heavy weapon, so the more to consider as you go head to head against these jerks. The Pilgrim has some other moves up in his poncho as well, like consumable items. Some give you more poise, while others let you do more damage to enemies' poise and stuff like that. But what you're really going to be using are the more obscure items like grenade and gun. The gun's ammo even refills at save points, so feel free to blast away. You also pick up special moves along the way, which cost inner light to use. Special moves are helpful, but you have to wear specific clothes to pull off some of them, and I just found that hilarious. You eventually unlock a move that exchanges your HP for inner light, so you gotta be careful. Foreign Son is not an easy game. In fact, I would say it's a very hard game. At least it was for me. You do get a lot of defensive maneuvers, rolls with iframes, clashing, blocking, and a couple of ways to heal. One way is called the Catalyst, and they're basically Estus flasks that recharge at save points. And the other is called Streak, this red bar here. and it charges as you deal damage, but it decreases as you take damage. Thus, why it's called Streak. And you're going to need to master all these mechanics because this game holds no quarter. One bad encounter with an enemy can lead to an early grave, so you are always on in this game. And some areas feel like you're running a gauntlet between save points. This game will test your reflexes and combat ability, so much so that I actually had to use the game's accessibility options to get through. Look, judge me all you want. I sucked at this game and I really wanted to see the story. No regrets. Speaking of me sucking, let's talk about these bosses. They kicked my ass. Even the very first boss smacked me around like how that grandma smacked around that sausage in Beer Fest. To the game's credit, if you die at a boss a few times, the game will send some sort of help or switch things up in very interesting ways I won't spoil here. But for the first boss, if you decided to team up with the mercenary in the beginning, that same merc will come help you out in this fight. But don't accept his help though, because he's trash and only gets in the way, but it's the thought that counts. And bosses really don't get easier from there, though I'll reiterate, the game does stuff to quote-unquote get you past most of these bosses. And it's always a bit of a shock at what happens, and that's really cool. But yeah, bosses are fine. I just sucked at this game. I guess I just didn't focus enough on the clash mechanic, which is weird because it really is a great mechanic. It can make some fights feel like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, where you can take enemies out pretty quickly if you learn their patterns. And when you pull it off, it feels great. That's it for combat. Foreign Sun's combat is a brutal, timing-driven dance built on clashes, poise breaks, and high-risk decision-making. Mastering saber duels, managing overheat, weaving in heavy weapons, and juggling stamina, items, and special abilities keeps every encounter tense and deliberate. The game hits hard, demands focus, and isn't afraid to punish mistakes, but when you read an enemy, break their guard, and land that finishing blow, it feels incredible. Bosses push these systems even further, turning pattern recognition and clash mastery into some of the most satisfying moments in the game. It's challenging, stylish, and deeply rewarding once it clicks. And if you do have trouble, don't be afraid to use those accessibility options.
Abilities, platforming.
There's honestly not a lot to talk about here. Foreign Sun is definitely a side-scroller with platforming, but platforming just isn't its focus. Don't go in thinking there's gonna be interesting and unique platforming sections and challenges. This game is all about combat, atmosphere, and narrative. The way the Pilgrim moves isn't bad, it's just basic, and that's okay when platforming isn't the focus. He has zero air game, especially if you jump and try to move backward. And the game has insta-kill pits, which is a major no-no for Metroidvanias, but other than that, I have no complaints. As far as abilities go, you get a few interesting ones, but I don't want to spoil them as they are very narrative driven. You do get tools that let you zipline and hover, and those are fine, but the stranger ones are where things get interesting. And the last ability you get is genuinely game-breaking for exploration, and it's sad to see because you get it near the end of the game, which is what I would say if the game didn't have a pretty neat twist, which, of course, I will not be spoiling here. But yeah, that's all I want to say in this section. There's not much to the game's platforming. There are traps to dodge and locked doors and such to navigate, but this game is all about combat.
Progression.
I think progression's where the game suffers the most. I so badly wanted to upgrade my beam saber so it would actually do real damage, but there's no crafting or blacksmithing in this game. You can synthesize new weapons and accessories at workstations, this game's save points, but you can't enhance items you already have. There's also no XP, leveling, gear, or skill trees, and no collect 3 of a thing to increase a stat. Any means of progression comes down to your mods, this game's accessories. Mods are basically computer components you install into your spine, which is awesome, and they do things like give you more HP, more stamina, let you deal more damage to certain types of enemies, stuff like that. There are a lot of mods to find in your journey, and they can definitely be helpful in a pinch. I said there's no gear, but that's not entirely true. You can get different attire, but they don't do anything to improve your stats. Instead, attire shows what faction you belong to, or are pretending to belong to. So, equipping the red attire allows you to enter areas run by the red gang, and the blue attire grants access to the blue gang. You know, stuff like that. It's cool and super helpful if you don't feel like fighting. That's it for progression. Progression in Foreign Sun may be its weakest pillar, but it still has a clear identity. With no XP, leveling, or traditional stat-boosting gear, your growth comes almost entirely from mods. They're fun to find and genuinely useful, even if they can't fully replace the satisfaction of upgrading your trusty beam saber. Attire adds a clever twist by acting as faction disguises rather than stat gear, letting you slip into enemy territory without a fight. It's a minimalist progression system that favors utility and world building over power fantasy, and while it may leave some players wanting more, it fits the game's tone and keeps the focus squarely on survival and skill.
Exploration.
Exploration in Foreign Sun is strictly linear. Until it isn't. I'll dive into that in the spoiler section, so for all intents and purposes, I'll keep the exploration discussion focused on a vanilla playthrough. With that said, yeah, a vanilla playthrough of Foreign Sun is a very linear affair. There are branching paths based on your actions, which I'll dive into in the atmosphere narrative section, but the moment-to-moment exploration really is just going from point A to point B to point C till you reach point Z at the end of the game. There's some deviation here and there for optional content, but there's a clear critical path you'll follow to the end. It's very non-Metroidvania-like, though you will unlock abilities and revisit areas in order to find new areas, so the MV nature is here, it's just not very strong. Again, on a vanilla playthrough. So we ask the million-dollar question. Is exploration rewarding? Yes, but only because the game's world is so interesting. But when it comes to discovering loot, weapons, collectibles, stuff like that, you're not really going to get many dopamine hits. But seeing all the sights and experiencing the world and its events, that's what got me hooked to this game, but that's stuff for the next section. I don't have much to say about the in-game map and fast travel. The map is fine for the area you're in, but you can't view areas where you're not. It's kind of a bummer when it comes to planning routes for the late game. As for fast travel, it doesn't exist. It's not a huge issue as the game has some pretty decent shortcuts and isn't particularly huge, so don't be too concerned about that. So yeah, not much to report on the exploration side of things on a vanilla playthrough. Foreign Sun's very linear with not too much to get excited for on the loot and collectible side of things. But that doesn't mean the game isn't exciting. Let's talk about the game's strongest assets.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
It's very clear Foreign Sun takes inspiration from Hyper Light Drifter, especially when it comes to the game's music. Tracks have this synthy, spacey feel that I just adore, and the focus on grandiose visuals feels like another nod to the indie masterpiece. But beyond those features, Foreign Sun is its own game with its own style, and I dig it. When it comes to atmosphere, the game does a great job at building a bleak, dying world. Every area and every scene in this game is gorgeous in its own way, and I just loved getting to a new area just to see the sights. The broken highways cast against a waning sunset, the ominous eternal lighthouse with its mysterious sun looming over everything. This game has some arresting moments that demand your attention. It's, at times, eerily beautiful in a liminal way, and at other times, grotesque and creepy. This game has some humor spread here and there in its NPC interactions, but mainly, you're going to be fascinated and bewildered by your surroundings and the game's events. And I mean this in a good way. I found Foreign Sun's setting and narrative extremely compelling. One of the most interesting parts of Foreign Sun is how the game approaches choice and narrative branching. Yes, there are dialogue trees here and there that make your choices obvious, but the game also does some really clever narrative branching based on your actions. There'll be times you do something, even seemingly innocuous things, and yet it will have a huge impact on the world. Obviously, I'm intentionally being vague, but Foreign Sun gives you many options you don't even know are options. It even uses death as a way to tell its story in open narrative paths. When it comes to the narrative, it's a combination of healthy environmental storytelling and lots of yap, if you choose to yap with NPCs. Regardless of how engaged you get with the world, you're not leaving Foreign Sun with many answers as to what's actually going on, but you will leave satisfied and wanting more. You'll have a vague idea of what's happening and who the major players are, but you will be left holding a bag full of questions. And I found that to be pretty cool. I like theory crafting with ambiguous endings. I do have a couple of critiques. My first is minor. I just wish there were character portraits for important NPCs. The game's chunky pixel aesthetic lacked detail, and so it was tough to remember characters when I couldn't put a face to a name if they even had a name. And second, I don't really know what biomass is, the game's proxy for a limited resource worth fighting over. Maybe I missed a conversation or two about it, but all I really knew is that the warring factions were fighting over it and that one district had an abundance of it, which made living in that district more desirable. I suppose I'd have liked to have seen what biomass is. Again, I may have missed something, but I think this game would have benefited with some more visuals and visual flair. That's it for this section. Foreign Sun's atmosphere and narrative thrive on mood, mystery, and striking visual identity. Its synth-heavy soundtrack, towering vistas, and bleak world create a tone that's equal parts beautiful, eerie, and unsettling. The game's strongest narrative trick is how it quietly reacts to your actions, offering hidden branching paths, subtle consequences, and not so subtle consequences, and even deaths that reshape the story in unexpected ways. Whether you dive into NPC dialogue or simply absorb the environmental storytelling, you'll leave with a hazy understanding of the world and a head full of theories. While the lack of character portraits and the vague nature of biomass can make some details harder to grasp, the overall experience is compelling, mysterious, and memorable. Alright, it's spoiler time. Go to this timestamp to fast travel to my final thoughts.
Spoilers.
Welcome to the spoiler section, where everything is brought up and the format don't matter. I'm not going into the narrative or any theories here. I really just want to talk briefly about what I meant when I was talking about a vanilla playthrough. You've probably guessed that vanilla playthrough means your first playthrough, and that'd be correct. Because if you want to gather more details about the world and obtain its many endings, you're going to need to replay the game multiple times. However, restarting the game is actually when the game gets super fun, and it's when the game is at its most Metroidvania. Like I said in the review, Foreign Sun is a linear game, but when you restart it in, I guess you'd call it a New Game Plus, you start with everything, even your abilities. And the late game ability you get in your first playthrough is essentially the ability to fly, and this opens up so many more paths for you. The world is now your oyster, and it's your job to find different paths to unlock different scenarios and endings. And some of these endings can be found in under an hour thanks to your ability to fly, so it's not like you have to replay the entire game if you don't want to. The game's narrative alludes to the cyclical nature of this world, or at least for the pilgrim you play as, sort of like samsara in the Hindu religion. There's no ending, at least none that I found, where you break this cycle, but re-exploring the world with all your broken tech while searching for new endings was a huge surprise and a lot of fun.
Final thoughts and score.
Foreign Sun is a striking, uncompromising adventure that thrives on atmosphere, tension, and style. Its brutal clash-based combat demands focus, its world is a haunting blend of beauty and decay, and its narrative branches in ways that feel genuinely surprising. The game stumbles in progression and offers only light platforming, but its strongest pillars, the mood, the mystery, the choices, more than carry it. Foreign Sun is the kind of experience that lingers, challenging, strange, memorable, and absolutely worth seeing through. I award Foreign Sun a 7.5 out of 10. Foreign Sun is available on PC. I played Foreign Sun exclusively on the Steam Deck with 0 issues, and therefore give it a Steam Deck rating of verified.
Pair placement.
Foreign Sun is a good game with a lot of great qualities, but it isn't the strongest Metroidvania, especially on a vanilla playthrough with its strict linearity. The game certainly has MV elements to it, and I would describe it as a Metroidvania for its interconnected world and ability gating, but what really saves Foreign Sun from being a subpar Metroidvania is the innovative and creative stuff I brought up in the spoiler section. This turn of events was an absolute treat and pushed Foreign Sun from being a bad Metroidvania into being a kinda cool one. Foreign Sun clashes in the C tier. I know it confuses some viewers when I give a game a good number score but a low tier list placement. Basically, what I'm saying about Foreign Sun is it's a good game you should check out if it looks interesting to you. But if you're looking to get an MV fix, there may be other games you'll want to prioritize. If you are looking for a game with a thick sci-fi, western, cosmic horror-y atmosphere, there are plenty of reasons to check this game out.